Swae Lee is known for his mesmerizing voice and undeniable talent that has captivated a huge audience all around the world. With his unique style and infectious melodies, this has led him to achieve many top charting hits and collaborations with some of the industry's biggest artists of today. Among those hits, a good majority of them showcase these talents to truly create catchy hooks and vibey melodies that take the listener to a whole nother world, creating a very enjoyable, feel-good listening experience. And in today's video, we're going to peel back the curtain and reveal exactly how Swae Lee achieves this smooth melodic sound, breaking down his vocal techniques and effects that you can implement to elevate the sound and feeling of your music. So if that's something you may be interested in, then don't forget to drop a like on this video and subscribe to the channel for more videos like these. But without further ado, let's get straight into the video. So obviously you can't have Swae Lee vocals without a Swae Lee inspired song, and for this video I teamed up with a very talented artist named Jamario to help me demonstrate and break down the technique and effects that Swae Lee uses for his music. The name of the song we're using today is called Control, and you can check out the full version of this song along with all of Jamario's socials and music in the description down below. So here's a little bit of what that sounds like.
You've been on timing, let me control your body. Don't even mind your games, cause you's a hardy. We can get away, hey baby, let's lose this party. Took shots of tequila, now she can't refuse this body. No, you can't get away from me.
So the first step to achieving Swae Lee style vocals is to take a look at the vocal chain that Swae Lee uses. But keep in mind, having the exact chain 1-to-1 isn't super critical, because the majority of the sound that you're going to get comes from how you choose to deliver your voice onto the microphone. And as you can see here, Swae Lee uses a variety of different microphones like the Shure SM7B and the Shure SM58. But if you want to get that polished, pristine vocal sound, then you may want to use something like the Sony C800G, which was the microphone that Swae Lee and Post Malone used to record their biggest hit to date, which was Sunflower. For this song, Jamario and I had the luxury to record it in Studio A at APG Studios in Los Angeles. Huge shout out to my boy Kareem. And the vocal chain that we used was a Neumann U87 into a Neve 1073 followed by a TubeTech CO1B, which is a pretty standard vocal chain that I'm sure 99.99% of the music industry already uses. But again, don't worry too much if you don't have this exact gear, because although it's a luxury to have, a good majority of Swae Lee's sound comes from how you choose to process the vocals, which is the next thing we're going to get into. So for these vocals, obviously we're going to be using the notorious auto-tune. Like, come on, is it even a record if there's no auto-tune on the vocals in 2024? You guys let me know in the comments below. But the way we're going to use auto-tune is very subtle, because Jamario and singers like Swae Lee already have a great voice off the rip, so not much auto-tune is needed to achieve this sound. After we get the key and input type selected, the only thing we need to play with is the retune speed to hear an effect. The settings I used for the vocals on this song was a 12 retune speed, and that's it. There's no need to overcomplicate these settings, because again, if you're already working with a very talented singer, this auto-tune is just going to slightly correct the vocals wherever needed to get that modern tuned vocal sound. Here's what that sounds like.
You've been on timing, let me control your body. Don't even mind your games, cause you's a hardy. We can get away, hey baby, let's lose this party. Took shots of tequila, now she can't refuse this body.
Once we have our auto-tune set, the next thing we have to do is polish all of our lead vocals together to get that Swae Lee vocal sound. So what I did here was highlight all the vocals and then send them to this vocal bus right here. So that way when I'm processing my vocals, I don't have to copy and paste my plugins onto each individual track, and just handle most of the processing on this one bus, which will save us time, energy, and CPU power, allowing us to be the most efficient when we're mixing vocals. And as far as the plugins go, there's two main tools that really help us achieve that polished vocal sound. Can you guys guess what those two tools are? Well, if you said EQ and compression, then you're absolutely correct. And I know this may sound broad and vague, because when you look on the market, there's a billion different EQs and compressors that you could be using. So it may be hard to understand which one works best for your vocals. But to keep things super simple, as far as EQ goes, I like to think about it in two ways: surgical corrections and broad stroke character. So for me personally, any parametric EQ that has multiple bands and a wide range of Q settings is perfect for surgical corrections to fix all the nasty and unwanted frequencies and buildups that come from when you're recording your raw vocals. This is why stock EQs are still perfectly fine, and is why I use them all the time within my my mixes. But if you want an EQ that has slightly more functionality, then I would recommend you to go for something like FabFilter Pro Q3 just to go that much more into detail when being surgical, removing all those frequencies within your vocals. And if we take a closer look into my vocal bus, you may see that the first plugin we have here is this SSL channel strip. And this is what I like to classify as a broad stroke character EQ. Although this has a good range of Q settings, personally, in my opinion, it does not go as narrow as something like a FabFilter Pro Q3 or any other parametric EQ for that matter, so it's not as surgical. But since this EQ is emulated off of the SSL consoles, that is what will give your source material that analog characteristic and sound. So for this SSL channel strip, all I did was filter out the super lows on the vocals, and I like to think of this as my broad stroke paintbrush cutting out all of these low end frequencies. Then when I go into my FabFilter Pro Q3, that's when I get more surgical. And I think this is crazy because this just goes to show you that if you get a clean, solid recording, you do not need to do that much EQ. If you see what I did here as far as the surgical EQ goes, I didn't do much at all. All I did was roll off at about 186 hertz at a 30 dB per octave slope, and then I just did a dynamic EQ at about 291 hertz for about 2.73 dBs. So we weren't doing much as far as the surgical removal of nasty frequencies. And for Swae Lee's vocals, since he usually sings in a higher register, you're able to remove a little bit more of those low end frequencies like we did here without losing too much body and weight, which is exactly why I removed all the way up to 186, which is pretty high for a male vocal. But again, it's because he's in that higher register. But one thing I will note is you must be careful, because if you roll off too much low end, then you will lose that weight and impact that will make your vocal sound thin, brittle, and overly processed, which is one of the biggest mistakes I see a lot of beginners make when it comes to their EQs. Let me just show you what will happen if I remove all of these low end frequencies.
You've been on timing, let me control your body. Don't even mind your games, cause you's a hardy. We can get away, hey baby, let's lose this party. Took shots of tequila, now she can't refuse this party.
Now, obviously, you don't want that thin vocal sound, which is why I left this low cut at about 186 hertz for this mix. And as far as compression goes, that's an even bigger rabbit hole that you could dig yourself into, which goes beyond the scope of this video. But just to keep things simple, for this song, I used an opto compressor, which is often a tube style compressor that has a smooth, transparent sound, which is perfect for Swae Lee Styled Vocals. We don't want to use a compressor that has an aggressive character like an 1176. We want something that will enhance the smoothness of the vocals, which is where this opto compressor comes in. So for this song, I just kept it simple. Since I already recorded with the TubeTech CL1B going in, I just threw on this CLA2A to control the louder parts that were coming in from this performance. So let's just jump over to the verse and see about how much dB of gain reduction we're getting for the vocals.
Hey, no, you can't get away from me. It's just me and you, and it's a remedy. We zooted it off shrooms, so we feeling everything. In love with my Lucy, I love what I see. I love what I see.
So for these vocals, the most compression I was getting with this CLA2A was about -5 dB, -4 dB max, but we were hitting about like a -3 dB average. So again, you don't even really need to do that much compression if you already tamed a lot of that with a hardware analog compressor going in. And if you guys don't have access to an analog compressor, then what I would recommend for you is to just use another compressor to tame those transients, so that way you could have that first compressor taming the transients and then move into something smoother like the CLA2A. So going a little bit more in depth into the CLA2A, as you can see, compared to most compressors, we don't have attack and release settings on this unit. But if we pull up the manual, you will see that we have a slow attack and a variable release, which is perfect for singing vocals because unlike rap, melodic vocals like this typically don't have super fast dynamics. So for that reason, we're able to use a compressor that has a slower attack and variable release, which is what will control the volume of our vocals transparently, giving us that smooth, consistent vocal sound that Swae Lee has. Then after that second compressor, I had a third EQ, which was the FabFilter Pro Q3, but I didn't even use anything, so we could realistically just turn this off. And then I actually had this FabFilter Pro DS. So I really like this de-esser because in my head, I think of it as very transparent. If you want something a little bit more heavy-handed, and if you really have super harsh sibilants, then I would recommend for you to use the Wave de-esser, because that de-esser really handles harsh in your face S's a little bit better. But this Fab Filter DS can really handle your sibilance while still being very transparent without making your vocal sound like it has a lisp. So with this de-esser, let me play a little bit of the bridge or pre-hook section because we have a lot of S's in there and you can hear what this de-esser is doing. So without it.
So let me imitate what's on your body. You say Chanel and Prada. I say it's nice and naughty. No, it ain't.
And with the Fab Filter de-esser, take a note of how much gain reduction we're getting right here, but notice at how transparent this de-esser sounds.
So let me imitate what's on your body. You say Chanel and Prada. I say it's nice and naughty. No, it ain't easy with all that body. I say we get up at it. Who cares? We don't see nobody.
So that Fab Filter Pro DS is perfect for taming the sibilance because we want to make sure that we tame all those nasty harsh frequencies before we get into our final two EQs. But before we get into our final two EQs, the last thing that I had was this C4 multiband compressor. So jumping back to the beginning of the first verse, the reason why I use this multiband compression is to tame specific frequency ranges within the vocals. So if I get a lot of boxiness within a vocal, I'll typically go down here and lower the threshold right here to tame that low sub frequency within the vocals. If we're getting a lot of that low end body that just won't go away. And then right here in this band, you could obviously adjust the bands, but for this band, what I like to do is if I hear a lot of boxiness, then what I'll do is I'll lower the threshold right here, and then that's how I tame that. And then if you have too much highs, we'll tame that right here. But for this vocal specifically, the only thing that we really needed to tame was those upper mids when it goes into those harder hitting sections. So again, if I play the first verse one more time, you'll see how this is just slightly attenuating that 1K to 7K region, so that way it's not too jarring to our ears when he's hitting those higher notes.
No, you can't get away from me. It's just me and you, and it's a remedy. We zooted off shrooms, so we feeling everything. In love with my Lucy, I love what I see. I love what I see. Like,
so you really hear that on the phrases when he says, away from me, or similar phrases to that sound, which is what's being tamed with that C4. But now that we have our sibilance tamed and that upper mid-range region tamed, then we can go back to that broad stroke character EQ concept. So again, everything before that was removing all of the nasty frequencies and then just taming the dynamics. Since we removed all the nasty frequencies that were getting in the way of our vocals, we can now use a broad stroke style EQ to go ahead and boost the frequencies we want to enhance the vocal even further. This is where the brightness, polish, and clarity come from. So to get this sound, I like to use the Purple 3.5 collection from Acoustica. These EQs are absolutely amazing for what they do and are my first go-to whenever it comes to boosting frequencies on vocals, because they can add brightness and clarity to your vocals without them sounding too harsh or brittle. So the first Acoustica EQ we used was this Purple M5V. And the reason why I like to use this one is because the highest frequency that you're able to boost on this one goes up to 5 kilohertz, but within this section right here, as you can see, we can boost 1.5K all the way up to 5K. And this is a good mid-range style EQ because we could boost those mid frequencies, which is where a good majority of that presence sits without it being too harsh. So that's why I just boosted at 4K right here at about 2.5 dBs. But then to get that air, I used the Purple P1 EQ right here. And as you can see, I did a 5 dB boost at about 12,000 kilohertz with a very broad Q. So it's affecting a lot of those frequencies above 12K and a lot of those frequencies under 12K. So let me just quickly show you what it sounds like without these last two EQs and then what it sounds like with.
so let me imitate what's on your body. You say Chanel and Prada. I say it's nice and naughty.
And this is with those two broad stroke additive EQs.
So let me imitate what's on your body. You say Chanel and Prada. I say it's nice and naughty. No, it ain't easy with all that body. I say we get up at it. Who cares? We don't see nobody. You been on timing.
So as you can see, it really boosts the clarity and it brings the vocal that much more forward in your face, which is super crucial for Swae Lee Styled Vocals. Now again, let's just do it one more time on the hook without any of this vocal processing, and then one more time with. So this is without any processing.
You been on timing, let me control your body. Don't Don't even mind your games, cause you's a harder.
And this is with.
You been on timing, let me control your body. Don't even mind your games, cause you's a harder. We can get away, hey baby, let's lose this party. Took shots of tequila, now she can't refuse this body.
If you guys are enjoying the video so far and want to get Swae Lee Styled vocals or other melodic vocals similar for your music, then feel free to click the link down below to get your music mixed and mastered today. Now back into the video. So once we get our lead vocals sitting in the right place, if you want your music to feel like it's floating into another dimension of immaculate vibes like Swae Lee's music, then you're going to have to make good use of reverb to pull this off. Before we get into this section of how I calculate my reverb, I just want to give you guys a quick warning because it's going to get very mathematical, so you can skip ahead if you don't want to see it, but I recommend for you to stay and watch so you can understand why I calculate it in this way. Now, every time I set up a session and I know that I'm going to be using reverb, the first thing that I like to make sure is that I have the proper timing set for my reverb to match the BPM of my session. To do this, I like to bring up a calculator and calculate my pre-delay and my decay settings for my reverb. So the equation I use is 7500 divided by the BPM. So in our case, for this song, the BPM over here is 107. So we're going to divide that by 107, and this is the value we get. And for those who may not know, when you use 7500 divided by the BPM, this number right here is the duration of a 30-second note in milliseconds. So to set my pre-delay time, I like to divide by 2 once or twice to get my pre-delay value. So if I divide by 2 right here twice, these are the two options I could use for my pre-delay. We have 17.52 and 35.04. So just so you guys know, 35.04 is a 64th note in milliseconds, and 17.52 is a 128th note in milliseconds. But for this song, I used the 35.04 value, which again is a 64th note. So to set that in your reverb, all you have to do is open it up, and for this song I use the Valhalla vintage verb and I typed it in right here. So since I got 35.04, go ahead and delete this and just type in 35.04, and there you go. Now we have our pre-delay time. Then to get my decay time, I just go back to this 70.09 value and then I multiply it by 2 once or twice, and then I'm able to get my decay time. So if I multiply it once, we get 140, and then if I multiply it by 2 one more time, we get 280. As you can see here, I have my Valhalla vintage verb pulled up, and whenever you get this note, if you want to get it into seconds, what you have to do is move the decimal value from the calculation over to the left twice. If we move the decimal point on 280 to the left twice, we get 2.80, which is the decay time that I got right here, which is 2.8 seconds. So just so you guys know, the 140 value here is a 16th note in milliseconds, and the 280 value is an 8th note in milliseconds. And if there was anybody out there that was wondering how I even got that 7500 value to begin with, I'm going to show you exactly how I achieved that. So there's another equation that a lot of people like to use, which is 60,000 divided by the BPM. And the reason why people use 60,000 because there are 60,000 milliseconds in 1 minute. So since BPM means beats per minute, when we divide 60,000 by our BPM, we get the equivalent to a quarter note value in milliseconds. So as you can see here, 60,000 divided by 107 equals 560, which would be 5.6 seconds, which is a quarter note in milliseconds. That is why this equation works. But for me personally, I don't like to use 60,000 because it's one too many clicks to type into the calculator, and it gives us such a big value that is usually too long for a decay time that's usable in a song. But if you divide 60,000 by 2 multiple times, you get different values. So 60,000 divided by our BPM gives us a quarter note. Then if we divide it by 2, we get an 8th note. Divide that by 2 one more time, we get a 16th note. Divided by 2 one more time, as you can see, we have that 7500, and that is a 32nd note. Divide that by 2 one more time, we get our 64th note, and then divide that by 2 one more time, and we get our 128th note. So realistically speaking, you can use any of these values, 60,000, 30,000, 15,000, 7,500, 3750 or 1875 divided by the BPM and get different note values. But another reason why I like to use this 7500 value is because it's smack in the middle of where I personally want to be. And since I like to keep things simple and only divide or multiply by 2, if I use the 60,000 equation, I would have to divide by 2 4 or 5 times just to get my pre-delay value. Versus if I use 7500, I would only have to divide by 2 once or twice to get that same pre-delay value. And then to get my decay time, again, I would just have to jump back to that initial 7500 value and multiply by 2 once or twice to get my decay. But now that we have all of the math out of the way, the main reason why we want to make sure that our reverbs are on time is so that when the reverb is ringing out, it rings out at the same speed as our BPM. And I also want to mention that calculating the reverb like this is just a good baseline to start off with. Obviously, you do not have to use these specific settings set in stone, but again, it's just a good starting point. And then if you want a longer tail or a different pre-delay time, you could adjust that accordingly without it being too on the grid. But now that we got our reverb time calculated and set in place, let me explain a little bit more about the actual reverb settings to achieve those spacey vocal sounds. So of course, we're using our reverb on ascend. So as you can see on my vocal bus, I have ascend here, and then it goes into this plate verb track right here, and we have these plugins. Going in, I just have an EQ and then the reverb, and then I have an imager to make it a little bit wider, and then another EQ to filter it out. But as far as the reverb goes, since we're using it on ascend, we use it at 100% mix. Now on the reverb itself, the reason why we chose this pre-delay time is because if you listen to songs like Sunflower or Unforgettable, you'll notice that Swae Lee's dry vocal hits first ever so slightly before the reverb kicks in. And that is what this pre-delay is doing. So just to exaggerate what I'm talking about, I'm going to increase this pre-delay value, and then I'm going to play it solo, just the hook. Take note at how long it takes for the reverb to hit after the vocal is being played.
You've been on timing, let me control your body. Don't even mind your games, cause you's a hardy. We can get away, baby, let's lose this party. Took shots of tequila, now she can't refuse this body.
Now listen to that compared to this super short pre-delay time when the reverb hits instantly.
You've been on timing, let me control your body. Don't even mind your games, cause you's a hardy. We can get away, baby, let's lose this party. Took shots of tequila, now she can't refuse this body.
So let me just throw that back to where we had it. And since we calculated our reverb and used this 35.04 milliseconds for the pre-delay time, that means that the reverb itself is going to wait a 64th note before it hits, which will avoid messing up with the clarity of the vocal, which is one of the downsides of having a super short pre-delay time, because if you use a super short pre-delay time, it can get in the way of the lead vocal, causing it to sound muddy, washed, and just messy overall, which can also push your vocals back into the mix. And that's something that we don't want for the Swae Lee sound, since everything sounds nice in the front and the reverb is doing its thing in the back. Moving on to the decay time, this is how long the reverb rings out. So for Swae Lee's vocals, we want a lot of reverb, but we don't want a super large decay time, because even if we go crazy with the decay time, it's going to get in the way of the other phrases, again making everything washy and messy. The thing about dialing in reverb is that it's all about balance. If you use too much, again, it becomes washy, muddy, and messy, and it messes up with the clarity of your vocals. But if you don't have enough, then you won't have that vibe and feeling that you really want, especially if you're going for that Swae Lee sound. Moving on to the reverb mode, you have all these different types of presets that you can select from here. Just to slightly brush over them so you can get an idea as to what they actually do. Typically, hall reverbs give you that 3D dimension and that front to back perception within your mix. Plate reverbs typically give you that widespread, which increase your perceived width. And room reverbs just give your source that extra ambience and coloration, since they're being modeled off of smaller rooms that reflect a lot of sounds bouncing off of the walls. I can go more in depth into the other styles that we have here, but that's a topic for another video, so be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on that banger video when I drop it. But for this video, again, just to keep it simple, I stuck with the concert hall because for Swae Lee vocals, of course, we want that 3D widespread reverb sound. Moving on to this damping section right here, what this does is it controls the sound of the decay time on the high end end frequencies of the reverb. So for you to get a better idea as to how this dampening affects your source material, let me play the hook for you soloed again without any dampening. So if I just take this away, this is what the reverb sounds like. Now take note to the high end frequencies of the reverb.
You've been on timing, let me control your body. Don't even mind your games, cause you's a hardy.
Now let me lower this dampening to about 1K and pay attention to the difference on the high end frequencies of the reverb.
You've been on timing, let me control your body. Don't even mind your games, cause you's a hardy. We can get away, hey baby, let's lose this party. Took shots of tequila, now she can't refuse this body.
So as you can hear, a lot of that top end shine gets taken away from the reverb, making it not as present when you play it within the full mix. So for that Swae Lee sound, we still need a little bit more of those high end frequencies to shine through. So for that reason, I set our high frequency cutoff at about 8,500 hertz, and then I use the slope at about negative 19.5 dB. Here's what that sounds like.
You've been on timing, let me control your body. Don't even mind your games, cause you's a hardy. We can get away, hey baby, let's lose this party. Took shots of tequila, now she can't refuse this body.
So as you can see, not too bright, but again, not too dull. So that way it sticks out a little bit more within the mix. So for the bass frequency of the damping, I'm going to skip over this and I'm just going to move over to this little shape module right here. So this shape section controls the room size of the reverb and the attack time of the initial reverb decay. So since we want the reverb to sound big and deep, I left the room size at 100. But let me just show you what happens when I lower the size to 0.
You've been on timing, let me control your body. Don't even mind your games, cause you's a hardy.
So as you can hear, the room just sounds much smaller, and you get even more room resonance coming from the reverb since it's emulating a lot of reflections bouncing off of the walls from a really small room, making our reverb not sound as smooth as it should be, especially if we're going for that Swae Lee smooth vocal sound. So let me reset that. And moving on to the attack knob right here, this is a super interesting knob. Since this controls the initial attack of the reverb decay, it will control how close or far your vocal sounds relative to the room size. So if we have a super short attack time, which on Valhalla is 0, then the reverb itself will sound like it's taking a step forward in the mix, moving closer to your vocals. Take a listen to what that sounds like.
You've been on timing, let me control your body. Don't even mind your games, cause you's a hardy. We can get away, hey baby, let's lose this party. Took shots of tequila, now she can't refuse this body.
So then if we make the attack bigger, it will give you the perception that the reverb itself took a step back away from the vocals, making it sound deeper and again, just pushed farther back into the mix. This is what that sounds like.
You've been on timing, let me control your body. Don't even mind your games, cause you's a hardy. We can get away, hey baby, let's lose this party. Took shots of tequila, now she can't refuse this body.
So understanding what these two shape knobs do will help you create that depth and vibe that Swae Lee has within his vocals. But for this song, I left the attack at 50 because I wanted a blend of that depth, but I didn't want it too far forward within the mix. And as far as the diffusion and modulation go, you don't really need to worry about that because the majority of the sound that we want to get is going to come from the shape, the damping, decay, pre-delay, and the mode. And then the only final thing that I did was cut out a little bit of the highs and the lows, taming the frequencies of the reverb further. So real quick, this is what the hook sounds like without the reverb, and then I'll play it one more time for you with the reverb. So real quick without.
You've been on timing, let me control your body. Don't even mind your games, cause you's a hardy.
And now with the reverb.
You've been on timing, let me control your body. Don't even mind your games, cause you's a hardy. We can get away, hey baby, let's lose this party. Took shots of tequila, now she can't refuse this body.
Now the last thing that I did to enhance the ambience of this vibe was add a quarter note delay to give the vocals a little bit more of that bounce and feeling. So to do that, I just had my quarter note delay sent at this much amount here. And then on the quarter note delay track itself, I just filtered it out going in because I didn't want any lows or any highs. And then I used, of course, the quarter note delay with a decent amount of feedback, lo-fi knob, and then I filtered it out at 301 hertz, and then I filtered out the top end at 2.7 kilohertz. And then I used this modulation, so microshift by Sound Toys, so that way it takes the H delay from a mono delay into a stereo delay, so it makes it wider. And then I went into this lo-fi plugin right here, and then I filtered it out, so if you decrease the sample rate, it filters out the effects, so it makes the delay sound a little bit more filtered out. But then I also included a little bit of distortion, so it still has like that crunch in the background, so it's not too quiet, but it's still slightly noticeable. And then I went ahead and I filtered it one more time with this Final Fat Filter Pro Q3, and this is what I got for the delay. So just a delay by itself, no reverb.
You've been on timing, let me control your body. Don't even mind your games, cause you's a hardy.
Moving on to the ad-libs and layers. Now, although some of Swae Lee's music does not have any ad-libs or layers, these are still very crucial to have in your music to give it that extra vibe and flavor, keeping the music feeling upbeat. So for this example, we have some ad-libs filling in the spaces in between the lead vocals, giving us that additional bounce.
You've been on timing, let me control your body. Don't even mind your games, cause you's a hardy. We can get away, hey baby, let's lose this party. Took shots of tequila, now she can't refuse this body.
Now, for the ad-libs, you can keep it simple and have it mix the same as the leads, but usually it's better to process them differently to have even more dimension and movement within your song. So for the hook ad-libs right here, obviously we had the auto-tune first, and then I filtered them out slightly, and then what I did was I put on the CLA 2A compression so that way they're not sticking out too much within the mix. But then I wanted a little bit more character, so I used this gentle transformer setting and drove it a bit so that way it sounds a little bit crunchy, the ad-libs, and it comes through with a little bit more character within the mix. And then what I did was, this is crucial, I did a quarter note mono delay, okay, because it's mono right here, but then when we throw the second plugin, it turns it into stereo. But we had a quarter note mono delay with a decent feedback, but a very low mix because it's directly on the ad-lib track, which is going to give us those repetitions. But since it's mono and then we hit it with this pan man right here, it then makes those echoes go left to right whenever the vocals are panning for the ad-libs left and right. And then if we scroll all the way down here, you can see I have these purple auxes right here, which I have sent right here. So I have this reverb for the ad-libs right here set at this, and then I have this delay that's just being used as a send. So with all those combined, this is what the ad-libs sound like by themselves. That's pretty much it. See, so we're getting a little bit more of that vibe, and as you can hear, when it pans to one ear, the echo is repeating in one ear, and then when it moves to the other ear, the echo is repeating to the other ear, since we use that mono delay and then hit it with the pan man after. Now the ad-libs for the verses right here are more or less the same, just with slight little tweaks. So we're going to move over into the layers for the pre-hook, which is this track right here. So if I solo just the layer, this is what the layer sounds like with the instrumental. So the only thing that I did for the layer was use a stereo delay, which in Pro Tools you have this mod delay 3. And the great thing about using this stereo delay is that you're able to control independently the delay for the left channel and the right channel, which right here we have the left channel and right here we have the right channel. I'm not using any feedback or anything like that. I just wanted to control the timing of the vocal and the way that it hits. So that's why I have the left channel set to 7 milliseconds and then I have the right channel set to 32 milliseconds. So if they're set the same, it's just going to sound mono. But if we have it set to how we had it, with the left at 7 and the right at 32, the left channel is going to hit your ear first, ever so slightly, milliseconds faster than the right channel. So it's going to still be different. So it's going to give us that wider washed sound. So as you can see, it sounds wider, but then after that, I just hit it with the Valhalla Vintage Verb. Since these are slightly more spaced out and we want them to be washy, I used the quarter note decay time for the reverb on this, but I just lowered the mix on it, and together we have this.
So let me intake what's on your body. You say Chanel and Prada, I say it's nice and naughty. No, it ain't easy with all that body. I say we get up at it. Who cares? We don't see nobody.
But to me personally, my favorite ad-libs would have to be the oohs on the hook that just add that much more vibe and flavor to the overall mix. So let me just play them for you right here solo so you can hear what they sound like, and then I'll show you how I achieve this sound. Nice. So when we recorded these ad-libs, Jamario recorded a regular ooh, he recorded a high one, and then he recorded a lower one. For the regular pitched ooh, I didn't do much but just some slight EQ and then a little bit of saturation to bring it a little bit forward into the mix. But when you throw in the processing for the high one, that's where the extra vibe points come in. So aside from the auto-tune, the first thing that I did was filter out a lot of the highs, so I didn't want any lows or highs, and then I boosted 60 Bs at about 1.5 kilohertz, and this is what that sounds like. So you get that super filtered sound. Then after that, what I did was I introduced that mod delay again, but I just left the left channel 0 and I delayed the right by 3 milliseconds, so that way it made it wider. So it's filtered and now it's wide and you get this sound. And then after that, what I did was I threw the Valhalla Vintage Verb again at 100% mix with the super long decay time, and then this is the vibe that you get. So for these ad-libs, since I wanted them to be in the background, that super washed sound was highly favorable, and that's why I processed those high ad-libs in this way. Moving on to the low ad-libs, the first thing I did was filter it out just a little bit. Okay, so nothing out of the normal right there. And then the second plugin that I used was this little alter boy. So the only thing that I really did was pitch down the formant, and then I drove it a little bit to give it that more crunch and in your face kind of character. You're basically just saturating it, and this is what we got. And then since I pitched it down pretty low, I didn't want any of that low end frequency information to come through. So I just filtered it at about 210 hertz with a 24 dB per octave slope. And then I spread it out to the sides with micro shift at a full mix. So this is what that sounds like now. Then altogether, you get the super vibey ad-libs in the background along with the ad-libs of the hook and the leads, and this is the sound that you get.
You've been on timing, let me control your body. Don't even mind your games, cause you's a hardy. We can get away, hey baby, let's lose this party. Took shots of tequila, now she can't refuse this body.
And boom, there you have it. And that is how you get the vibey, smooth, melodic Swae Lee style for your vocals. If you guys had any additional questions, feel free to leave them down in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, then don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so that way you can stay up to date for when I drop more videos like these. And I got a few more cooking up for you as we speak. And if you're a beginner engineer or just want to get into Pro Tools and learn how to engineer yourself, then don't forget to check out our Pro Tools recording course where I will show you everything about using Pro Tools and get you up and running like a professional engineer in absolutely no time. But now that we have our vocals dialed in, the next important thing is to make sure we have a big, impactful low-end sound that will give our mix the weight and impact our music needs. So check out this video right here where you will learn how to get great sounding low-end for your music. I'll I'll see you guys in the next one.